Hey guys, with the new expansion finally upon us, it is time to ask the question, should you play Elemental Shaman in The War Within? Now before we go any further, I just want to say I think it's always a good idea to just play what you enjoy the most. The damage tuning is still ongoing right now. Things are very much in flux on that side of things, so it's kind of iffy to talk about damage, and if you decide to pick a class just because it's doing a lot of damage right now at the end of beta, that might change by the time we get to the raid, because tuning is going to be happening all the way up through Heroic Week and even possibly past that as well. So you don't want to pick a class that you played just because it did a lot of damage in beta, just for it to get tuned down below what you actually wanted to play. So just keep those things in mind. But the playstyles, I think, for the most part, have probably crystallized at this point, so we can at least talk about that. And because this is a video, we're just going to be talking about things how they are right now as they stand. So I will mention damage to some degree, but just know that those things can change. So, how is Elemental doing? Well, Elemental is actually in the best position it has been possibly ever going into an expansion. It, for one, is right now doing really decent damage, especially in Mythic Plus. Should be somewhere maybe middle, maybe high middle of the pack in single target, again, as these things stand right now. And the most important factor beyond anything, beyond damage or anything like that, is the fact that we now finally have a raid buff to bring to the group. We're no longer having to compete for the leftover DPS slots after all the other buffs are gone, because we have a buff of our own. And Sky Fury is quite a decent buff. It is definitely something you're going to want to have in every single raid group, especially if you're doing push content, if you're doing heroic and mythic raiding, you're definitely going to be wanting to have at least one Sky Fury in your group, which means that instead of competing against all the DPS classes in the game and trying to fit into those last couple of slots, now you're really just competing against being as good as or better than Enhance or Resto Shaman to make sure that you're getting at least one Shaman in your group. So if Ellie's the best version of Shaman, it's going to be brought to a group 100%. So that's something that's completely changes the landscape of where we fit in a raid environment. And I just want to also mention that Sky Fury is actually a really powerful buff. It's not just like, unfortunately, like Hunter's Mark, which isn't very strong. Sky Fury is very good for a lot of classes, and like I said, it will definitely be an instant invite for raid, but it will also be very good in Mythic Plus as well. Probably not at the same level as like Power Word Fortitude or even Arcane Intellect, even after it got nerfed. It's still going to be very powerful and a welcome addition one way or the other. So just from the baseline of having a raid buff, Elemental is in a better position. Obviously, like I said, all Shamans bring it, but it does allow us to be more competitive within our class rather than being competitive against the entire group of what's in the game. So already Elemental in a much better position from that one small change. Another thing I want to bring up is the fact that Elemental is performing quite well in Mythic Plus right now, and there's more, again, more than just the damage, although the damage is quite nice in Mythic Plus as it has existed in beta. It's also bringing a lot of relevant utility. The major ones are Curse Dispel and Poison Cleanse Totem. Being able to kind of AoE cleanse poisons is really useful, especially in dungeons like Arakara or City of Threads. Both of those have at least some point in there where you want to be using an AoE poison cleanse. Very useful for those situations, but even more so than that is Curse Dispel. Only, I think, 3 classes in the game have access to Curse Dispels, and it is basically required to do dungeons like Grim Batol, especially like getting beyond like 10s or even 12s, or honestly even just 10s really. You're going to need a Curse Dispel for Grim Batol, and then also for Stone Vault, though maybe slightly less important in there, but still pretty important. Just because of how much damage is associated with those curses. AoE slows are obviously very useful as well. AoE stuns. Just a very good kit for Mythic Plus, obviously bringing Lust as well. So Elemental is in a very, very solid place for Mythic Plus. Raiding is a little bit harder to say right now because all the testing that we did for the raid was back when we were using completely different builds. The tuning was completely different. It was very much fire focused, and now we're very much lightning focused for everything, which is also important to bring up. Pretty much all of the builds we're using right now are lightning focused, very much revolving around either Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt, and casting as many of them as you can, as opposed to casting out nothing but Lava Burst. So that is something that is different coming from the previous expansion to The War Within. So keep that in mind as well if you're not a big fan of that kind of playstyle. Maybe it might not be for you, but you should definitely give it a chance and check it out. But going back to raid, Yeah, it's really hard to say exactly where we are. I would say we'd be about middle of the pack if I had to guess, because not everything is pure single target. There are going to be ads that we're going to be wanting to cleave in certain fights. And we will probably need to swap back and forth between the hero trees, which I'll get into in a little bit. But actually, we can go ahead and get into it right now. Basically, in general, Stormbringer is looking to perform better in Mythic Plus than Farseer, though that might change. There's actually, especially if you're pulling slowly, if the pull count is slower, Farseer might actually be better in dungeons, but it's kind of hard to say right now. I haven't seen enough actual data to really be 100% sure on that, but right now, in general, Stormbringer for Mythic Plus and in massive AoE, and Farseer for pure single target. The playstyle doesn't really change much at all. It's basically the exact same playstyle as it stands right now. It's just how you're kind of funneling in everything. Stormbringer has a lot more procs and is a lot more, I would say, annoying to play with if you're not used to playing with a lot of weak ores, because it demands a lot more tracking than Farseer does. Farseer, you can basically fire and forget. You get access to an ability called Ancestral Swiftness, which replaces your Nature Swiftness, and you can basically just tie that into your Primordial Wave and basically just macro those two things together and basically always use them together. Pretty simple to think about when it comes to using Farseer. Stormbringer just has a lot of procs that you just got to keep track of, and can make it a little bit more, you got to stay a little bit more on your toes, especially if you're not tracking those things, but you really need to if you want to perform well playing Stormbringer. So those are kind of the playstyle things. I think it will be fine in Raid. Mythic Plus Elemental has already shown to be quite good. It still is lacking behind, at least from a damage reduction standpoint, from a defensive standpoint. It does have the new defensive, which is Stone Bulwark Totem, which is definitely a welcome addition, because it's basically a 45% shield on just a 3-minute cooldown. Obviously, that's better than not having anything else at all. It's definitely better than just not having that, but it's still a 3-minute cooldown, kind of long. You are reducing the cooldown of it with Flash of Lightning, and as long as we're playing lightning builds, that will be useful to be constantly reducing the cooldown of your major defensives. Both Astral Shift as well as Stone Bulwark Totem will be reduced by that, which means that you're having more access to defensives than we basically have for the past year and a half. So we will be tankier, but just in general, things like Mage will obviously be the king of defensives pretty much for the end of time with the way that hero talents have gone. So, yeah, I think Elemental overall is in a really, really solid place. The defensives is kind of the only place that it feels like it might be kind of lacking, but not really. I think it's more slightly below middle of the pack now, but definitely better than where it was before. So if that was the thing that was making you hang up on it a little bit, I think that's been shored up enough, and I think it does make up for it for the amount of utility it has, as well as for the damage it has right this moment. Obviously, damage is kind of the king at the end of the day. Whatever class ends up doing the most damage is the one that's going to get, invited to groups the most often. But having Sky Fury as a raid buff is definitely going to help combat that to some degree. Which should make Elemental more included into just about every single group comp, whether it be Mythic Plus or Raid. Obviously, I think it'll do a little bit better in Raid in terms of its inclusion, as long as at least as long as it's competing with Enhance and Resto. So those are kind of the major points. Should you play Elemental Shaman? I think that's completely up to you, but I really do think, I really believe, even with tuning, even if we get tuned down a little bit, I really do feel like this is the best position Elemental has ever been in as far as wanting to be included into a group. If damage stays the same, it's probably in the best position it has ever been going into an expansion. Elemental has been strong in the middle of expansions several times before, but has never started off an expansion doing well. So if you're interested in Elemental, if you're really gung-ho to play something that you haven't played before but have always wanted to try Elemental, this is really a good time to jump into Elemental. Though, just as playing devil's advocate here, some people really are not a fan of the lightning playstyle. It is very, well, I was about to say it's very different from how the lava burst spam playstyle was. It's really not. It's actually quite similar. It's just instead of pressing the red button, you're pressing the blue button instead. That's really what it comes down to differently. There's obviously some caveats there. And like I said, I'm not going to get too much into rotation right now, but it's a fairly easy playstyle to learn with a somewhat higher, not really too high of a ceiling as far as skill cap goes, but pretty easy to get into. But there's definitely things there to help you if you enjoy min-maxing. There's definitely little things that you can do to help squeeze out a little bit more damage, especially as you start getting higher and higher into Mythic Plus or rating if you're looking to really, really optimize your DPS. So if that sounds interesting to you, then Elemental might be the class for you. But those are the major things. Again, I can't stress enough, Elemental is in a very good place right now. Hopefully that does not change. Hopefully tuning stays favorable for them, and if they do get nerfed, they don't get nerfed too much. They're not overpowered in single target whatsoever. Mythic Plus, they're just performing well, but they definitely don't have the same level of like single target like power as a lot of other classes, and they don't really have a significant amount of burst. Burst is one thing that just Elemental just has absolutely no access to burst whatsoever. It's very flat damage profile, but that's not always necessarily a bad thing. So I've kind of rambled on here a little bit at the end of this, but again, I think Elemental's in a great place. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope to see you in the War Within. But other than that, guys, I will see you in the next video.